Sam Peebles was a man trapped in a quiet, unassuming life, a life built on routine and predictability. A seemingly ordinary insurance salesman in Junction City, Iowa, Sam was also, at heart, a man perpetually teetering on the edge of a midlife crisis he stubbornly refused to acknowledge. His days were a monotonous cycle of appointments, paperwork, and the quiet loneliness of his bachelor existence. His past, a tapestry woven with threads of trauma and suppressed memories, lay dormant beneath the surface, occasionally stirring in the form of vague unease or fleeting nightmares he could never quite recall. Sam's world was upended, subtly at first, by a promise he made to a young boy. A local event, a rather dull community talk about the importance of literacy, had led him to encounter a seemingly innocent request. He needed to prepare a speech for an upcoming engagement, a Rotary Club luncheon. And to do that, he needed books. Lots of them. His assistant, a kind but somewhat officious woman named Naomi, suggested the local library. Sam, however, hadn't set foot in a public library since his childhood, a period of his life that he had largely compartmentalized and left untouched. He had a vague, unsettling memory of a library, a dark, dusty place, and a sense of fear associated with it, but the details were lost in the mists of time. Reluctantly, driven by the practical need for his speech, Sam ventured into the Junction City Public Library. It was a grand, old building, its architecture steeped in history, its interior a hushed labyrinth of towering bookshelves and echoing silence. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and dust, a smell that, for Sam, triggered a faint, almost imperceptible shiver of dread. At the circulation desk sat a woman who seemed carved from a block of granite. Her name was Mrs. Lords, a stern, imposing figure with an unblinking gaze and a voice like rustling sandpaper. She was the quintessential librarian of nightmare, a gatekeeper of knowledge who seemed to resent its dissemination. When Sam explained his need for multiple books, her face hardened, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You'll need a library card," she stated, her voice devoid of warmth. "And a note?" "A note?" Sam echoed, bewildered. "From your mother," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "To ensure you return them. Or, the library policeman will come." The words struck Sam with an unexpected force, a jolt of primal fear that he couldn't explain. The phrase, "the library policeman," sent a cold tendril of dread snaking down his spine. It was a name he hadn't heard in decades, a boogeyman from his forgotten childhood. He tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as an old woman's peculiar quirk, but the fear lingered, a bitter aftertaste in his mouth. He acquired the books he needed, a stack of dense tomes on public speaking and local history. As he left the library, Mrs. Lortz's parting words echoed in his ears, a chilling whisper. "Remember the due date, Mr. Peebles. The library policeman, he doesn't forget." Back in the comfort of his own home, Sam tried to immerse himself in his research, but the unsettling encounter with Mrs. Lortz and the resurrected fear of the library policeman gnawed at him. He found himself unable to concentrate, his mind drifting back to vague, disturbing memories of his childhood, specifically to a time when he was around 10 years old. His unease intensified as he noticed strange occurrences. The books he had borrowed seemed to move on their own, shifting positions on his desk. He heard faint, inexplicable noises in his house, rustling sounds, like pages turning in the dead of night. He dismissed it as stress, as an overactive imagination, but the fear persisted, a subtle, creeping sensation beneath his skin. Then, the phone calls started. Silent calls at first, then calls where he heard only a raspy, guttural breathing on the other end. He assumed it was a prank, or perhaps even Mrs. Lortz herself, playing some twisted game. But the breathing was too deep, too inhuman, too malevolent. His sleep became tormented. Nightmares, more vivid and disturbing than ever before, began to plague him. He saw images of a dark, hulking figure, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent, its presence radiating an overwhelming sense of cold, predatory hunger. The figure was chasing him, always chasing him, through dark, cavernous spaces that felt strangely familiar, yet terrifyingly alien. The due date for the books approached, and Sam found himself paralyzed by an irrational fear of returning them. He knew, intellectually, that the library policeman was a childish fantasy, a tool used to scare naughty children into returning books. But the primitive part of his brain, the part that harbored buried fears, believed it to be real. His anxiety spiraled into full-blown panic when he started seeing the library policeman. Not in his dreams, but in his waking hours. Fleeting glimpses at first. A shadow at the edge of his vision, a hulking figure disappearing around a corner. Then, more direct confrontations. A dark shape looming at his window, a terrifying face peering at him from the shadows. The figure was gaunt, almost skeletal, with long, grasping fingers and eyes that burned with an unholy light. It smelled of rot and dust and ancient decay. He remembered the name, then, with a jolt of sheer terror. Ardelia Lords. Not Mrs. Lords, the librarian, but Ardelia Lords, the being she served, the monstrous entity that lived within the library policeman itself. The librarian, he realized, was not just a stern woman. She was a conduit, a servant of this ancient evil. The buried memories began to surface, fragmented and horrifying. When he was 10, Sam had taken books from the library without checking them out. He had been a mischievous boy, testing boundaries, and he had been caught by the then librarian, a younger, equally stern Mrs. Lords. She had threatened him with the library policeman, a threat that had resonated deeply with the impressionable child. He had returned the books, but the experience had been traumatic, the fear imprinted on his young mind. But it wasn't just a childhood prank. It was something far, far worse. The real reason for his fear, the true horror he had suppressed, was now clawing its way into his consciousness. He had a memory of a little girl, a friend, who had also been caught taking books without permission. And then, she had disappeared. Completely. No one had ever seen her again. The library policeman, Sam now understood, was not just a threat for overdue books. It was a devourer of fear, a predatory entity that fed on the terror of children who failed to return books, and in doing so, consumed them. It made them disappear, wiping them from existence, leaving no trace. His childhood friend hadn't just disappeared, she had been eaten by the library policeman. He was the next target. He had taken books, and he had not returned them on time. The game had begun. Desperate, Sam sought help from Dave Duncan, a psychologist and friend. He recounted his terrifying experiences, the apparitions, the calls, the surfacing memories, the chilling reality of Ardelia Lords. Dave, initially skeptical, grew increasingly concerned as Sam's vivid, terrified account unfolded. He recognized the signs of severe psychological distress, but also a core of genuine, unshakable terror that hinted at something beyond mere delusion. Together, they formulated a plan. They would return the books. It was the only way to appease the entity, to break the cycle of fear and pursuit. But returning them wouldn't be enough. They had to confront the library policeman directly, to face their fear and, if possible, to destroy it. The journey back to the library was a descent into a nightmare. As they drove, the landscape around them seemed to twist and distort, the familiar landmarks morphing into sinister caricatures. The air grew cold, thick with the scent of decay. The library policeman, now fully manifesting, appeared in their path, a gaunt, shadowy figure blocking the road, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Sam and Dave barely managed to escape, their hearts pounding in their chests. The pursuit was relentless, the library policeman a terrifying, unstoppable force. It moved with a preternatural speed, its chilling laughter echoing through the silent streets. They finally reached the library, the imposing building now radiating an aura of malevolence. The doors, once heavy and mundane, seemed to writhe and contort, beckoning them into the darkness within. Inside, the library was no longer a place of quiet knowledge, but a living, breathing horror. The bookshelves stretched into infinity, their shadows alive with shifting forms. The air was thick with the dust of ages and the putrid stench of fear. They found Mrs. Lords at the circulation desk, her face transformed. The stern librarian was gone, replaced by a grotesque, ancient hag, her eyes burning with the same malevolent light as the library policeman. She was not just a servant, she was Ardelia Lords herself, or a direct extension of the entity, the human facade stripped away. The confrontation was brutal. The library policeman, a hulking, terrifying presence, emerged from the shadows, its long, skeletal fingers reaching for them. It was a physical manifestation of fear, of all the forgotten terrors of childhood, of the consequences of unfulfilled promises. It was hungry, its very existence fueled by the terror it instilled. Sam, armed with a desperate courage he didn't know he possessed, and guided by Dave's calm, rational presence, fought back. It was not a physical fight, but a battle of wills, a struggle against overwhelming fear. They had to break the cycle, to face the monster that had haunted Sam for decades. The key to defeating the library policeman lay in understanding its true nature. It fed on fear, on the unreturned fear. By confronting it, by refusing to be paralyzed by terror, they were starving it, depriving it of its sustenance. In a desperate, climactic struggle, Sam managed to return the books. Not just placing them on the counter, but thrusting them into the waiting, spectral hands of Ardelia Lords, forcing the debt to be paid. The act was symbolic, a declaration of defiance against the ancient evil. As the books were returned, the library policeman shrieked, a sound of agony and rage. Its form began to waver, to shimmer, as if losing its cohesion. The library itself seemed to groan, the ancient walls trembling. The creature, deprived of its fear, began to dissolve, its malevolent form shrinking and fading. Ardelia Lords, the librarian, also underwent a terrifying transformation. Her ancient, grotesque features twisted and contorted, reflecting the agony of her master. She too began to fade, her essence intertwined with the disappearing entity. The library policeman, the embodiment of forgotten childhood terrors, was finally vanquished. The library, still dusty and old, returned to its mundane reality, the oppressive aura of malevolence lifted. Sam and Dave stumbled out of the library, exhausted, shaken, but alive. The experience had been harrowing, a journey into the darkest recesses of human fear, but they had emerged victorious. Sam had faced his past, confronted his suppressed trauma, and finally freed himself from the terrifying grip of the library policeman. The aftermath was one of quiet recovery. Sam, though deeply scarred by the ordeal, found a new sense of peace. The recurring nightmares ceased, the phantom smells of decay vanished, and the chilling echoes of the library policeman faded into memory. He had come to terms with his past, understanding that the greatest monsters are often the ones we create in our own minds, fueled by unaddressed fears and unresolved trauma. He continued his life as an insurance salesman, but with a renewed appreciation for its normalcy, its predictable rhythm. He would never again take a library for granted, and he would certainly never take out a book without intending to return it. The fear, though real and tangible, had ultimately led him to a profound understanding of himself. The story, The Library Policeman, is a chilling exploration of childhood trauma, repressed memories, and the psychological impact of fear. It delves into the idea that the monsters of our youth can resurface in terrifying ways if left unaddressed, feeding on our anxieties and consuming our lives. Sam Peebles' journey is not just a battle against a supernatural entity, but a desperate fight for his own sanity, a confrontation with the lingering shadows of his own past. The library, a symbol of knowledge and order, becomes a place of profound dread, a repository of unspoken fears and the lingering presence of an ancient, malevolent force that preys on the innocent. The triumph, therefore, is not just survival, but the reclamation of one's own mind from the grip of terror.